In the last couple of years, we have entered what we're told is a golden age of space travel, and Mars is what has everyone excited. Elon Musk says he wants to retire on Mars, and I'm sure there are many people who'd like him to expedite that. NASA desperately want to get astronauts there. People are very seriously planning how to manipulate the Martian atmosphere, how to produce food there, how to build the infrastructure for a human colony. And coupled with the rapid developments in AI, it's clear that we're on the cusp of something. An era which could make us an interplanetary species and perhaps even evolve into something post-human as opposed to posthumous. My next guest is a world-famous theoretical physicist, Michio Kaku. He's Professor of Physics at the City University of New York. You will be familiar with his visage via his umpteen television appearances, and you will have read some of these plethora of best-selling books. The current example, The Future of Humanity, Terraforming Mars, Interstellar Travel, Immortality, and Our Destiny Beyond Earth. And Michio is with me in the studio in Sydney to discuss all of those things. Welcome.
Glad to be on your show.
Elon Musk wants to retire to Mars. Why do we need to get there?
Well, I once had a conversation with Carl Sagan, the astronomer, and I asked him that very same question. And he said that the Earth is in the middle of a cosmic shooting gallery. And one of these days, a rock is going to hit us from outer space. And look at the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs did not have a space program. And that's why they're not here today to talk about it. There are no dinosaurs in this room because they got wiped out by a rock about 5 miles across that hit Mexico. And he wanted us to have an insurance policy, Plan B. That doesn't mean evacuating the Earth. That's cost too much money. No one is talking about leaving the Earth and going to Mars. We're talking about a settlement, a self-sustaining settlement on Mars that's not going to drain the resources of the planet Earth, but it'll give us an insurance policy, Plan B, in case something bad does happen to the planet Earth.
Are we entitled to have a Plan B, given our poor track record with this planet?
Well, yeah, take a look at this planet. Right under your feet, if you were to drill right under your feet, you'll encounter fossils. 99.9% of all life forms become fossils and disappear off the face of the Earth. Extinction is the norm. We think of Mother Nature as being warm and cuddly, which is partly true, but nature is merciless when it comes to wiping out inefficient life forms, and that's why we have fossils. And I just hope that we don't become a fossil. And that's why I think we need a space program and this insurance policy, which is self-sustaining. It's not going to drain the resources of the planet Earth. Prices are dropping like a rock. Silicon Valley billionaires are footing the bill for many of these advances. And so I think it's well within the realm of economic and practical feasibility to have Plan B.
It's decades since Carl was on the program, but I remember finding his argument totally persuasive. But let's look at the astronomical figures involved in moving off the face of this Earth. To put a thing on Mars costs upwards of $1 million per pound, Michio.
Yes, and that price is dropping. In fact, we're going to have a traffic jam around the moon pretty soon. We have not one, but 3 moon rockets capable of reaching the moon. NASA has the SLS booster rocket, which next year, write this down in your calendar, next year will take us back to the moon for the first time in 50 years. Then we have Elon Musk with his Falcon Heavy, fully capable of launching a Tesla motor car into outer space, or the moon for that matter. And then we have Jeff Bezos of Amazon. Not to be outdone, he has endowed a spaceport in Texas, and he's going to launch the new Armstrong rocket to the moon. Not to mention the Chinese and the European Union. We're going to have a traffic jam around the moon, and I predict that our grandkids will have the ability to honeymoon on the moon. And so the moon is only 3 days away. It's a hop, skip, and a jump. So I think that's an easy target. Mars, of course, is much farther away and more difficult.
We haven't shown very good skills at sorting out any sorts of traffic jams. I'm wondering who will have the responsibility to prevent the clutter you're anticipating.
Well, good question. You see, we have the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, a great treaty which says that nuclear weapons should not be put into space, and nation states cannot claim Mars or the moon. The problem is, in 1969, who would have thought that a private individual using his own piggy bank, using his own bank account, can create a moon rocket fully capable of reaching the moon with colonists? Elon Musk is selling tickets to be on the first commercial venture to the moon. And a Japanese billionaire by the name of Miyazawa bought out the entire rocket. And so this is now well within economic feasibility to have tourists go to the moon.
Let's go back to Mars. Musk has suggested detonating hydrogen bombs above the ice caps to melt them and create an ocean as a first step in terraforming.
Yes. You see, Elon Musk is in a rush because basically NASA has been in a holding pattern. NASA has been the agency to nowhere. So he wants a very quick way to create a Garden of Eden on Mars, which is to melt the polar ice caps. Now, I personally do not think that hydrogen bombs would be the way to do it. Years ago, I was even offered a job designing hydrogen warheads. So I know that we have the capability to do it. It wouldn't cost that much either. We know how much nuclear weapons cost. But I think we have no way of guaranteeing the stability of the ice caps and how radioactive they would be afterwards. Who wants to drink water that's radioactive from the polar ice caps? I think solar satellites is the way to go. Launch satellites around Mars which will beam sunlight down on the polar ice caps to begin the process of heating Mars by 6 degrees. Once you can raise the temperature of Mars by 6 degrees, it takes off all by itself. All of a sudden, you get a runaway greenhouse effect, and Mars basically terraforms itself once you raise the temperature of Mars by 6 degrees with solar satellites. That, I think, is the way to go.
We've been having an ongoing argument on this little program about the likelihood of intelligent life in the neighbourhood, and the jury is still out. But I would agree with you that given that there are 20 billion Earth-like planets existing in our backyard, it's highly likely that there is significant life out there.
Yeah, in fact, I'll put money on the table. I think they're out there, and I think perhaps in this century, we may actually eavesdrop on some conversations between alien civilizations. But don't think we're going to have a conversation with them. Chances are the signals will be from stars that are hundreds of light years away. So a two-way conversation with them may not be possible. But yeah, I think they're out there. They may not want to visit us because we're perhaps too primitive. But I think that they're out there, and I think one day we'll pick up their transmissions and eavesdrop on their conversations.
And the logic suggests that we're under their surveillance now.
Possibly, if they're that advanced that they can roam across the galactic space lanes, that immediately means they're thousands to millions of years ahead of us, in which case perhaps they've already been observing us. When we go to the forest, do we want to talk to the squirrels and the deer? Maybe at first, but eventually we get bored because the squirrels and the deers don't talk back to us and have nothing to offer us. So in the same way, I think they would treat us like forest creatures. Interesting, cute, but rather useless.
During the Obama administration, it became a depressing time for space. This is post-GFC. A lot of programs at NASA were defunded. 20,000 space program veterans lost their jobs. Dark days, as you say in your book. So what does it mean for America's leadership in a space that NASA has been supplanted by the private sector?
Well, first of all, prices have been dropping like a rock. You know the movie The Martian starring Matt Damon? That movie cost Hollywood $100 million. But the Indian government sent a probe to Mars for $70 million. So a Hollywood movie about going to Mars actually costs more than actually going to Mars. And then we have Elon Musk with reusable rockets, which will hopefully drop the cost of rocketry down by a factor of 10. That's the goal anyway. And so we're entering a new ball game now. In 1966, the Apollo space program gobbled up 5% of every tax dollar. 5% of the entire federal budget went into the Apollo space program. That's unsustainable. There's no way you can sustain that. Now NASA is down to a fraction of that, and private enterprises picking up the slack. And so I think it's a new ball game.
Let's look at the politics, the evolving politics of space, because China, Russia, Japan, Europe, America are all jostling, beating their pectorals. It's not quite as congenial an image as you described when we signed that international treaty.
Yes, we are not the only game in town anymore. As I mentioned, the Indians can now go to Mars. The Japanese have already been to the moon, as well as the Indians. And the Chinese have stated that sometime after 2025, we don't know for sure, but sometime in the near future, the Chinese will plant their flag on the moon as well. And so the short term is we need a new outer space treaty to regulate traffic as we go into outer space. And we have to regulate private enterprise. You realize that Google, not to be outdone, but Google is now jumping into the game. They want to mine asteroids. And so then the question is, who benefits if you can mine an asteroid for tens of billions of platinum-based chemicals and minerals? There's a gold rush out there, says the leadership of Google, and they want to be able to mine asteroids, and we need new regulations, just like we needed regulations in California when the gold rush happened there, and we had thousands of miners clashing with each other to hunt for gold.
Michio, I wonder whether we won't need a few new presidents to take on that regulatory task. LNL on RN, it's coming to you today from the space station. My guest is theoretical physicist Michio Kaku, who's in Australia. And if you're in a major city, you may be able to get to one of his talks on the future of humanity. More on that later. So many things to talk about. Nanoships. Tell me about nanoships.
Well, we've been brainwashed by Hollywood to think that you have to have a gigantic enterprise with a brave captain called Captain Kirk to take us to the stars. That's actually the most inefficient, in fact, stupid way to colonize the galaxy. A simpler way is to shoot small little chips, little nanoships that my late friend Stephen Hawking talked about at length. Shot into outer space by laser beams, inflated by a parachute that's attached to each postage stamp. And in 20 years, traveling at 20% the speed of light, we can reach Alpha Centauri, the nearest star system, and take pictures. Think about that, a true starship within the next few decades using off-the-shelf laser technology. And beyond that, who knows, within 100 years, once we master the art of fusion, then fusion rockets, which use the power of seawater, may be able to take humans into outer space, not just postage stamps.
One of the things you mentioned in passing, another counterintuitive notion, is that we might one day be able to travel through space without actually leaving our bodies.
Yes, I call this laser porting. Within 50 to 100 years, we will digitize ourselves. That is, our memories, our personality. We'll be able to digitize ourselves and in some sense become immortal. In fact, I would love to have a conversation with Einstein. One day, someone in Silicon Valley will digitize everything known about Einstein and put it into a robot with a personality, and we'll be able to talk to Albert Einstein. We'll talk to Winston Churchill. Libraries will be a library of souls.
Could I interview Winston Churchill? That's a terrific idea.
Yeah, I think it'll be possible, I think, in the coming years, because already we're not talking about Silicon Valley startups offering to digitize everything known about you on the internet, your credit card transactions, the wines you like to buy, the vacation spots you go to, all of that digitized. And in the future, we'll digitize the brain itself. That's called the
does that mean
project.
that we could be elsewhere via an avatar?
That's right. I think that when we do this, one application is to put it on a laser beam, because laser beams can transmit information, and shoot it to the moon. In 1 second, you're on the moon. In 20 minutes, you're on Mars. And in a few hours, you're on Jupiter. And on the moon, there's a mainframe that downloads the laser and then puts you into an avatar that looks just like you, except you're super strong, super handsome, super pretty, and have the power of a Superman flying all over the moon and Jupiter and Saturn and Mars. I call this laser porting, and I'll stick my neck out. I think this already exists. I think aliens from outer space think that flying saucers are so 20th century, so primitive. Flying saucers? Oh. They simply digitize their personality, put it on a laser beam, and shoot their consciousness at the speed of light. So that in the morning, you have breakfast in New York. You would then have lunch on the moon, and then off you go to the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, visit a few asteroids, and that same evening, come back for dinner in New York.
Decisions. Now, you come up with some rather elegant terms. One of them is the superhighway of souls. Is that your description for all of this?
That's right. See, we are so primitive that we may not realize that right next to the Earth there is a superhighway of laser beams, each beam carrying a soul, that is, a digitized person, traveling at the speed of light throughout the universe. And so we are so primitive. We're listening to radio. That's so 1950s technology. We're listening to radio signals from alien civilizations. I think they just simply laser port their consciousness at the speed of light throughout the universe, bypass booster rockets, bypass radiation, weightlessness, all the hazards of space travel, and as pure consciousness roam throughout the galaxy.
We're talking about forms of consciousness. Let's ask about artificial consciousness. Where are we on the spectrum of AI at the moment?
Well, we've been brainwashed to think that Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Terminator is a threat to humanity. However, if you take a look at our most advanced robots built by the Pentagon, and you realize that they have the intelligence of a cockroach, that is, a bug. You put a bug in a forest, and a cockroach immediately finds mates, foods, shelter, runs and hides. You put our most advanced robot in the forest, and it simply falls over and gets lost. So we got a long ways to go. But I predict that in the coming decades, we will have robots as smart as a mouse, then a rat, then a rabbit, then a cat, dog, and by the end of the century, I don't see why we can't have a robot as smart as a monkey. At that point, they are potentially dangerous.
Well, that's something else. The dangers thereof. I know that Hawking, among a galaxy of stars, is very concerned about this. Or was in his when he was with us.
However, I think the concern is a little premature in the sense that, like Paul Revere, it's always good to have the warning go out early. But I think we're decades away from robots that can replace humans and become our evolutionary successors. Robots today have the intelligence of insects, but I think by the end of the century, they'll become as smart as monkeys, and monkeys are potentially dangerous because they have self-awareness. Monkeys know that they are not human. Now, dogs are confused. Dogs think that we are a dog, that we're the top dog, and they're the underdog, and that's why they obey us. But monkeys have no illusions whatsoever. And so when our robots become as smart as a monkey with monkey self-awareness, I think we should put a chip in their brain to shut them off if they have murderous thoughts. At that point, they could become dangerous.
I remember Asimov writing an essay probably half a century ago where he anticipated the idea of replication, of self-replication. Will robots reach a point where they'll be able to clone themselves?
Well, that's called the singularity. The singularity is some mythical point in the future where A, robots become as smart as us, B, they make children. They make copies of themselves, each generation smarter than the previous copy, and it exponentially explodes until they take over the planet Earth. Some people even think they'll take over the solar system and take over the galaxy. I tend to be a little bit more cautious in the sense that this depends on Moore's law, that computer power doubles every 18 months. But you see, Moore's law is slowing down. I'm a physicist, not a computer engineer. And I realize that because of the laws of quantum mechanics, we are reaching the end of the age of silicon in the coming decade or so, so that your laptop will not be twice as powerful as it was the previous Christmas. And the Moore's law will flatten out. Silicon Valley could become a rust belt. That's why we physicists are desperately working on things like quantum computers, computers that compute on atoms rather than silicon, but they're not ready yet. Quantum computers are not ready for prime time. So we could see a falling off, a leveling off of computer power in the next decade or so.
We haven't even got time to tackle the idea of curing death, which is an amusing notion by one of your mates at Google. Thank you very much for your time, Michio. Michio Kaku's book is called The Future of Humanity, Terraforming Mars, Interstellar Travel, Immortality, and Our Destiny Beyond Earth. And it's published by Penguin. Thanks,
Okay.
Michio.
And it's been a real pleasure being on your show.